Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. Today I've got Brad Baldridge. He is a college funding specialist. If you've got some kiddos that you're going to be putting through college at some point in their life, especially if it's coming up, you're going to want to hear this episode because he's helped thousands of families save for college and plan with smart, proven strategies. As a financial expert, blogger, and host of the Taming the High Cost of College podcast, Brad's been sharing his college planning insights with clients, subscribers, and listeners for nearly 20 years. He teaches parents the best ways to save and pay for college, including how to find the right school, maximizing financial aid and scholarships, avoiding student loan debt, and to make your kids' college dreams come true. Brad, welcome to the show. It is great to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You have got such a unique, I want to say, like, career and job. I did not know that people like you existed. I wish, we were joking before we hopped on here, that I wish 17 years ago I had discovered you. I probably would have benefited greatly. For those in the audience that don't know much about you, why not give us a brief intro on yourself and your background and how you got into this very specialized niche, helping parents with their child's college expenses?
Yeah. So I'm a financial advisor. So I got into financial advising 5 or 6 years after college and worked in just general financial advising. And I still work in that. But in addition to that, I've got a college specialty, and that came about as college became more expensive and became a bigger piece of the pie. I started working with some families and realizing that there's lots of the things that you can do, but
Mhm.
most people don't really understand how aid works and that type of thing. So they're not doing what they can. And the more I talked about it, the more people listened. So the more I talked and started a podcast, and now I work with lots of families every year trying to figure out how to plan and pay for college.
So let's start with where I think most people are, and that would probably be where my parents were in regards to college. So I think you've got like two different parents here. One of the ones that are starting early, ever since their child is born, they've been putting money into tax advantaged accounts for education, and they've been saving, and they're ready for college. I think that's the few and far between. Then most people are like, "Oh my God, my kids are going to high school. Sweetie, we've got to start doing something about this." And I think that's where most people fall into this bucket. And I remember specifically when I was getting ready to go to college, God bless my mom. She was literally filling out all uh, my applications to all the different schools. And I did not know how many scholarship opportunities were out there. I mean, there is so much free money and unique tips and tricks when it comes to, financial aid and, getting into the right schools. I had no clue the amount of free money that was available to me. And I think this is where most people fall short. They don't know this huge world that's out there. And I'm sure that this is where you kind of come in and you can show them that. So, as a parent that is preparing to send their kid to college in a few years, probably high school to college, what kind of plan, like, how do you think they should even get started and where should they begin?
Right. Yeah, I think it really needs to start with an education on the various programs out there. So, broadly speaking, there's what we would call need-based aid, which is based on the finances of the family, and there's merit aid, which is typically based on the student. And most people think of that straight A student as getting scholarships, which is true, but merit could be broadened to the athletes, to the musicians, to the talented students of all different types that because they've got something going on, the colleges want them more than the average kid. So they're willing to provide additional merit scholarships to those students. So that's one key category is colleges themselves provide a ton of aid. And then to go with that, there's the federal aid programs, the state aid programs, and then outside scholarships. So, Bill Gates Foundation has run scholarships for years, and a number of other big companies have things going on. Coca-Cola's got a very famous scholarship program. All those things are out there. And for a lot of families, some of them are a great fit and some of them aren't so good. So that's the challenge, right? When someone says, well, this kid got a full ride over here, and it's like, I want to do that. Well, everybody wants to have a full ride. The reality is that's very rare.
Mm-hmm.
But what is very common is getting 20 or 30 or 50% off based on either need based or merit aid especially at the private schools where a lot of places people do not pay anywhere near that list price.
Mhm. When you
So
say need-based and merit-based, tell me a little bit more about that.
right. So need-based system kind of evolved over the years where they launched the various student loan programs and Pell Grant and all these different federal programs. Um, and they've been around for years and years. I mean, they were when I went to college many moons ago. I took student loans, and
Mhm.
but there's also some grants in there for the very for the lower income families and that type of thing. So and that program has evolved, and they've added things, things like loan forgiveness on the back end, and special programs for teachers and nurses. So again, there's all these different programs where, well, if you happen to be going into teaching, you've got this program. If you happen to, be going to a private school, there's this program instead of that program. And it's just, like I said, there's just every time they try and add something to help somebody, there's one more layer of stuff that people need to understand of, well, is this the program for me or is that the program for me? So, and that's primarily need based, and it's based on filling out the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, that most families will use. And then once you fill out the FAFSA, that gives them the basics of your finances. And with that, they can calculate if you qualify for certain need-based programs.
Okay.
So for the typical student rolling out of high school, going directly to college, it's based on the family. So the system has been set up to assume that mom and dad are going to help if they can. Now, it's based on their income and their assets primarily. It's also based on the student's income and assets, but of course, students' income and assets coming out of high school is zero or nearly zero. So they don't have a big impact. So that's the system as we know it on the need-based side. Then on the merit-based side, again, there's a lot of colleges have kind of three layers of scholarships. They have scholarships available to kids that just apply.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have test scores like this and grades like that, we'll give you 5,000 off. If you're a little bit better, we'll give you 10,000 off. And if you're really good, we'll give you 20,000 off. And all of that's all, what they would call automatic scholarships. In other words, we get the information we need right on the application. You tell us what your test scores are, you tell us what your grades are. So we have the information we need, and we pretty much automatically award the scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some colleges put that right on their website. If your scores like this, it's 22,000. If you look like that, it's 18,000. If you look like that, it's 16. And you can literally figure it out by just going to the website. Now, a lot of colleges do something very similar to that, but they don't publish it for everyone to see. Mm-hmm. So they keep it a little more private. And I think they do that, again, not to be nefarious, but to adjust, based on, okay, we're getting a lot of kids that are very strong, so we can't give everybody as much as we used to give. Or the kids that are really strong aren't taking our scholarships, so we can give more money to the other kids. So they're trying to balance it out. And if they make promises on the website they can't keep, that doesn't do anything. It's no good for anybody. So they want to, again, control the process a little bit more. But that's what's going on as far as the first layer. Then if you apply and fill out financial aid, then the colleges will also determine if you have a need for aid based on the financial situation. A typical family at about 150,000 of income stops qualifying for aid at most state schools because they're relatively low cost. Mm-hmm. But I've seen families earning 3, 4, 500,000 qualify for need-based aid in certain situations. Now, the higher your income, essentially, the less aid you're eligible for.
Sure. So you got needs based, which is more assets and income, right? More probably directly involved with the federal government and being able to borrow. And then you've got merit based. This is more like athletic scholarships. This is more along the lines of some scholarships that are probably given to students who qualify for like in-state scholarships if they meet like a certain GPA, et cetera. And so right. it's more of not necessarily needs based, income based, asset based, but more what are some of those additional things that you can do to qualify to be able to get the merit based scholarships. I'm curious, why is it that colleges will reduce the amount that someone can pay in tuition to go to a school based on their scores? Where does that come from?
Right. Well, a lot of, I think it's a kind of a fallout from college ranking. Uh, College were ranked by U.S. News and World Reports and other companies for years and years. And part of the inputs to that are the average test scores and the
Okay.
average GPAs and that kind of stuff. So schools with higher average test scores rank better. So schools that can bring in those kids. And then on the flip side, right, kids that are really bright and go-getters are the kind of kids that go out and become senators and et cetera. And
Yeah.
right. And they provided great alumni networks. And so again, all these schools aspire to be as schools like, the Ivy League and Harvard, right, where they
Yeah.
say, well, we educate the best and the brightest, right? They take the cream of the crop, and do they give them any better education than any other college? Well, maybe, maybe not. You could argue that if you take all the rock stars, you don't have to work real hard to educate them.
Yeah.
And they still are rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
And they go on again to do great things, and then they become wealthy, and then they share that back to the university. So the colleges at the very top, that's one example of, okay, understand how that game is played if you've got a kid that can get in. The reality is most kids can't. They accept 3, 4, 5, 6% of their applications, and lots of people that are not getting in have great test scores and great grades, but again, they get to take the cream of the crop. So, but if you're in that realm, by all means, they're also very generous. So those types of schools will meet 100% of your need no matter what. So like, as an example, Stanford had a press release that said if your family income's under $100,000, then tuition and room and board will be zero. You won't pay anything towards either one, which is makes college essentially free.
So they incentivize lower tuitions to the smarter students to be able to attract the brightest talent that then goes to the school, that then does really well, that then will give back to the university, or I guess increase its status among university, its rank, which will then attract more students and increase technically the demand for that college. And then you can increase by, okay, interesting. I've always wondered how that works in the region.
Right. So that's the vicious cycle. Now, again, Stanford, which is already the best and the brightest, doesn't do any sort of merit aid whatsoever. Everybody there is already a rock star. So they say we only do need-based aid. So again, if your income is under 100,000, we're free. Now you got to be a rock star just to get accepted. And they've decided that if everybody's a rock star, how do we pick who qualifies for more aid? So they decided we're not even going to pick. Everybody's a rock star. But if you need it, we have tons and tons of aid, because they, again, these are the universities that have the billions in their endowments, and they're looking for ways to share it and with whoever needs it. So again, those elite colleges work a little differently. And then when you move down, the game changes at the local private school. They're much more tuition driven. They need to bring in, $42 million this year, because they have expenses of $42 million to pay the faculty and run the university.
Right.
So, but they also know that they're not going to get full price. I mean, it's kind of like the airline industry, right? You never quite know what the person sitting next to you paid, because there's a lot of variability in airline pricing, right? They've built a very complicated model. They've done the same thing around college, right? So in the airplane situation, some people really work hard and use their frequent flyer miles and find all the various systems to get really low costs. Other people walk up, put their credit card on the counter and say, I need to be in Boston as fast as possible, make it happen. And
they pay full price.
They'll pay full price or whatever because they need to, right? It's kind of the same thing around college. Some families earn enough where they say, we're willing to pay top dollar if that's what it's going to take to get our kid into this school or that school. We think it's worth it. And certainly the more prestigious schools have that opinion more often, right? There's lots of people that are happy to pay full price at UCLA or at Harvard or, again, a lot of the name brand schools. Whereas when you start talking about a small state school in the plain states, well, maybe not as much. So they tend to offer discounts.
So let's talk about those airline frequent flyer guys that hack the system and use that. I just used my Amex to basically pay for my entire honeymoon. It was great. Free flight, free hotels, the whole thing. We'll pay for food. And I'm like, heck yeah, man, this is awesome. Let's spend more on the business card, right?
Right.
What are some of the top strategies for parents out there who, haven't done the best job of saving for college. They've got a kid in high school and they're like, dude, all right, I've got 3, 4 years, maybe even a little bit less to that. What are some of the top strategies they can use to take advantage of the need-based and merit-based
Right.
scholarships or
Yeah.
funding, I should say?
So especially on the need base, because it's based on your income and your assets, you can calculate some of the system here, and that's what I help families do. There's what's called an SAI calculator on my website, which is essentially a financial aid calculator that helps estimate what you might qualify for based on your finances. But again, for a lot of families, if you do this, it counts against you. If you do that, it doesn't count against you. So that's one more piece of the puzzle. Now, sometimes it's a challenge, right? In other words, like your assets are counted against you. So if you had $100,000 in the bank, you would qualify for less aid than if you didn't. So some people are saying, well, I'm going to take that $100,000 and put it somewhere so that it doesn't count against me, which is a legitimate strategy. Now, the challenge, of course, then is then when the college bills come, you go, well, now I don't have any money to pay the bill.
Yeah.
So you got to find that balance of this works and this doesn't. And that's what there's literally hundreds of tactics, right? On the very lowest level, right? Where you can say, all right, if I shift, as a business owner, right, you can control your income a little bit. So I'm going to stop invoicing in December and I'm going to get all my clients to pay me in January instead of December. So now December will be lower income. Now that makes sense, but you also have to plan ahead and say, well, but the next year it's going to be higher.
Yeah.
So is that better or worse, right? So that's a tactic. Is it a good tactic? Well, it depends on where your kids land and what year we're talking about, because you're going to do financial aid every year you have somebody in college. So there's key years, right? The first year for your first student is a key year. Any year where they've got multiple kids could be a key year, because now you're doing aid for 2 kids. So as a business owner, you might say, I'll have higher income when I don't have kids in school, and I'll have really low income the years I have got 2 or 3 in school. Again, I had 3 kids that were, they're 4 years apart. So I have 1 year potentially where I'll have 3 in college.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the year that that's the year to keep, to really focus on. If I can only afford to do it 1 year, that would be the best year. And the other years, do what you can. And that's, I think, where a lot of people need to realize it's kind of a little bit of a planning and optimization, just like taxes, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of business owners to say, did my taxes last year and it was awful. So I decided to do something differently so that it would turn out better. Mm-hmm. Financial aid is kind of the same. You got to fill out the forms properly. But if you don't like the answer you're going to get, you will then do something in your life different so that you get a better answer.
Okay, so that one tactic, and I think this really sounds like it's geared more towards business owners, not necessarily W-2 employees that are getting paid consistently. Where you can kind of,
and again, there's strategies there too.
So let's talk about that. So manipulating your income, I know how that is. Like, at the end of the year, I shove as much expenses in the month of December that I know I'm going to have next year that I can, so I can reduce my taxable income. That's a strategy that I use. And, we structure S corps and have a lot of the LLCs losses and gains flow up into that S corp to offset each other. So there's specific strategies that you can use if you're able to manipulate your income as a business owner, if you're going to do it during the same year that you're going to apply for that financial aid. I think it's like the strategy there. What about W-2 employees? What are some of the best strategies that are unknown to the mainstream that they can use?
Right. So there's just been a recent change where in the past, they used to add back contributions to retirement. So if your salary was $100,000 and you put 20,000 into retirement, you only pay taxes on 80. But for financial aid purposes, they would actually add that 20 back in and you'd be back to 100.
They count it. Okay.
Right. That has changed, effective for this FAFSA we're filling out right now, where they no longer add it back in if it does not show up on your taxes. So there's another, again, a tactic. Business owners, when you have your own 401k or your SEPs and simples and some of that stuff, a lot of times that tax deduction shows up on your tax return. That's where they're getting the data from. So if they can see that you put money in retirement on your tax return, they'll add it back in. But if they can't see it, they won't add it back in. The typical W-2 employee, they can't see it because it doesn't show up on your tax return. Your W-2 is just smaller because you put money into retirement. So again, another tactic around should I put money into my retirement? Should I put it in the Roth version or the deductible version? Well, in the college years, it might make more sense to use the deductible version because it brings your income down. Now, the big caveat to all of this is at certain income levels, right? There's just no hope, right? So yes, you can move your assets around a little bit, but your $1 million salary is just going to blow you out of the water no matter what you do. So
No matter what.
stop
Yeah.
worrying about need-based aid and focus on tax planning and focus on merit aid and focus on choosing the right schools and negotiating with schools and saving and investing and all the other strategies that you can use, because probably half the people I work with, need-based aid is just never going to happen. Whether it's because they're going to low-cost state schools, which means incomes 100,000 plus aren't going to work, or even at Harvard and Yale, which are very expensive, it starts phasing out at 300 or 400,000. So if your income's at 900,000, you say, "Oh, I worked really hard. I got it down to 600,000." It's like, well,
it's not gonna work. So
doesn't matter. So hopefully it didn't cost you anything to do that, because you're not going to. There's no benefit.
What is there a cutoff for need-based aid? Is kind of like a collective rule, like, hey, if your household income is not less than $150,000, don't bother? Or is there a certain threshold that you would encourage people to look into it?
Right. Yeah. So there is no automatic number, and that's the challenge, right? So for every dollar you earned, just like taxes, right? For every dollar you earn at the very lowest incomes, right, you don't pay any taxes at all on it. Well, it doesn't impact need-based aid at all. But once you cross about $50,000, then it's kind of a sliding scale. Every dollar you earn above 50,000, 10 or 20 cents is counted against you, and then 30 and 40 cents. And eventually it's as high as 47 cents for every dollar you earn. But so if your need, so the way that works is that reduces your need every dollar you earn. So, and your need is based on the total cost of attendance. So it's total cost of attendance minus your SAI. So total cost of a typical state school is about 25 to 30,000. A typical SAI is about 25,000 when your income is about 120,000, let's say. So if your SAI is 25,000 and the school costs 25,000, well, 25 minus 25 is 0. You don't have any need.
Now, for those listening, what does SAI mean?
SAI, Student Aid Index. It replaces the old EFC. So people that are familiar with what maybe you did as when you were in college, or you've had older kids that are in college now, it used to be called EFC. Effective just this year, it switched to SAI. It's pretty much the same thing. Just the formulas to calculate it are slightly different.
Okay, so so when it comes with need-based aid, then they're going to look at your income, they're going to look at your assets, but unless you're just really killing it out there, it would benefit you to look into this,
right?
And
what I tell people is if you're going to not, occasionally people say it's just a waste of time. Why would I fill it out? And it's like, well, if you're 100% confident you're not going to get anything, and to be that confident, you really got to figure out what's going on.
Yeah,
it's probably easier to just fill out the forms than to try and figure out if I'm going to qualify or not. So either you do the work to verify that skipping the forms isn't going to hurt you, which takes a lot of work, or you fill out the forms, which also takes some work. But again, so that's the challenge, right? There's a lot of people that think they're not going to get anything, don't understand what they're talking about fully. They just say, well, brother-in-law didn't get anything, and I make about the same as him, and I'm not going to get anything. Well, okay, are you looking at exactly the same schools, the same academic profile, the same financial profile? And the answer is usually no. And therefore, you got to base your decisions based on your situation, not your brother-in-law's or whoever else gave you that anecdotal evidence.
Okay, so obviously there's some tips and tricks here with needs-based, right? Ways to legally manipulate your income through, hey, if you're used to in the past, you mentioned that if you put something into a deductible tax advantage retirement account, that they would include that. They changed that this year, you said.
Right.
And so being able to make the decision to divert more money towards those tax advantage accounts rather than after tax advantage accounts like Roths, where on those financial aid forms, they're going to look at that and go, oh, we're going to include it if it's going to like a Roth, because that's an after tax contribution, versus we will deduct your income if it is a pre-tax contribution. So these are some strategies that are more geared towards that needs based. Talk to us more about the merit side, right? Because this seems like it might be a much bigger world with a lot more possibilities. What are some of the best strategies for merit based funding for college? Is just like, because I remember when, oh my God, like my mom would just beat me up about not filling out these applications. It was like if you had like a natural mohawk, you could go get a some kind of scholarship. If you had Native American and qualified up to a certain percentage, you could get a scholarship. I mean, there's scholarships out there for so many different things. It's just going to take you a lot of time to go dig through it. What are you seeing out there as some of the best strategies for merit-based aid?
Right. Well, again, so merit-based aid, you start with, again, choosing the right college that offers merit-based aid.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, right? Let's say your income's, 700,000 and your kid is looking at Stanford. We already know, like we just mentioned earlier, Stanford does not offer any
There's
sort
no
of
merit
merit.
there at all. Okay, I see.
But if your student gets accepted at Stanford, they're a rock star, right? That's what it takes to get accepted. So if that's the crowd they're running in, if they're that strong of a student, there's a lot of colleges out there that would give them, 25,000 off, 50,000 off of a 60 or 70 or $80,000 college. Now, on top of that, if you go down one more level, which we didn't touch on last time, but a lot of colleges out there will have, 5, 10, 30, whatever the number is, of students on campus that get essentially a full ride. They're the presidential scholars, or it's named after a big donor, right? It's the Bill Gates scholars, because Bill Gates gave the $1 million or 100 million or whatever to pay for these kids to all go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are, again, a lot of times academic, sometimes academic and need, but some of them are just academic. The Coca-Cola scholarship is just an academic and merit-based system, and there is no need component to that.
Mm-hmm.
So based on that, again, if you can say, well, and then of course it's always, well, if you can just get a little bit better, right? So if you could find that college that where you're going to be one of those 10 or 15, then, and it's going to be a full ride, well, then you may want to apply to those colleges. Now, a lot of times those colleges don't have the name recognition, right? I give the example of, well, you could, there's a students that can just barely squeak into Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So they're probably going to pay full price or get a little bit of need-based aid, but they're not going to get much merit aid because they looked at you and said, you're not very good, but I guess we'll take you. Right. That's their attitude, right? Whereas that same student at a local private school might be a cut or two above the average. And they'll say, wow, you're fantastic. We're going to give you our maximum merit scholarship of 35,000.
Yeah.
And then that same student at, some little college that nobody's ever heard of might be that rock star where
Mm-hmm.
they get a full ride. Now, the challenge is, does a student that's done well enough to get into Notre Dame, just barely, but still that's a pretty strong kid, do they want to go to that no-name school that nobody's ever heard of just because it's free?
Yeah. So
And
I want to focus on those. Forget the rock stars, because the rock stars are the few and far between. Let's focus on who's not a rock star. And I'm a parent, and I want to squeeze as much merit aid
right,
as possible out of the system. You said number one, it starts with selecting the school. And then number two, selecting what merit-based opportunities that school then presents. So this is where people fall short. They don't even know these things exist.
right,
How, as a parent, do I take the necessary steps to research what is available? Like I would probably start with in-state schools, because in-state tuition is less expensive than out-of-state. And so I've identified the in-state schools. How do I go about identifying the merit aid opportunities that those schools offer?
right. Now that's the challenge. It's a deep dive into their website in a lot of cases, and
Okay.
or I mean, we've got some software that's available to that we can use, and I work with families, but it's a little bit of legwork, and that's the challenge, right? Is a lot of people put this off, and that's why, in my opinion, you need to really understand this stuff and understand it early enough that you have enough time to execute on a plan. So get started sophomore year of understanding, okay, my student's pretty strong. And again, when I say rock star, right? Rock star for Harvard is a lot different than rock star for Marquette or for Loyola or for whatever, as compared to even the small regional schools, the St. Benedictine or whatever, the little school that, a kid that can't even get accepted at a lot of places is still a rock star at these smaller, less quote unquote lesser schools.
Yeah.
They'll still get a great education, and they'll still go on to be a teacher or go on to be a nurse or go on to be a whatever it is. But it's just a different path. And that's the reality, right? Is a lot of families have this, name brand obsession of got to get my kid in the right kindergarten so they get in the right grade school, so they get in the right high school, so they get in the right college, and then their life will be perfect. Well,
Okay.
no, probably not. But but there's lots of families that are just saying we just want to go to college, right? The top 10% can only be the top 10%. The rest, the 90% after that, are all still going to college. They're all still getting degrees. They're all having great jobs. And that's so that area now, again, you might be merit aid, you might just go to the low cost state school. And I think that's the reality for a lot of families is figure out what your local state school will cost. And then if you've got a sharper kid, what is your flagship state school cost? Mm-hmm. Now, some like here in Wisconsin, we've got University of Wisconsin in Madison. It's pretty tough to get into. It's the top, for the local kids, it's the top 10-ish% of the class or top 15% of the class at some high schools. So there's a lot of kids in that high school that aren't going to get into Madison. So they can have to go to some other state school. And that's the same in like Illinois and Minnesota and Michigan, where they have a flagship that's more challenging. California, they've got lots of flagships that are more challenging. UCLA and UC Berkeley, and all of those are very selective. And then they've got the whole state system. So you really have to understand your system and where your student fits in. But that's going to be the school that's going to be the price to beat. A typical state school, again, here in Wisconsin, the flagship is 29,000. In Texas, the flagships are about 30. UC schools are about 35. The average state, the lesser, and I hate to use that word, but that, they're still good schools. But the other state schools, a lot of these places are $3,000-$5,000 less. Mm-hmm. Here in Wisconsin, you can get to a pretty decent state school, 24,000 instead of 29. Mm-hmm. And then the student can borrow 5,500. That's what, the loan program that's available for the student. And maybe they can work summers for another 5,000. So if they can get covered 10 of that 25, let's say, now we're down to 15, and that's what's left for mom and dad to pay.
What are some of the best ways to balance planning for retirement with also funding college? Because those things just don't go hand in hand. A lot of times most parents are discovering they haven't done as well of a job as they should have been preparing for retirement. At about the same time, they're sending their kids to college. And so both of those things require pretty significant savings in order to achieve. How do you balance doing both of those if you have any recommendations?
Right. Well, and again, a lot of the families I work with, it is a challenge, but it's a challenge at every income level. And I think that's where you need to kind of pay attention, right? I'll have families that, earn $200,000 a year, and they'll say, well, we haven't saved anything for college. I mean, we're really tight. We don't have any money at all. The next guy I talked to, right, they earn 150,000. They say, we don't have any money at all. We're really tight. But if we hit, that guy that you just met that earns 200,000, well, he's got an extra 50,000 a year to pay for college. I don't understand how he can't afford college.
Well, I think that's because people's income, their lifestyle matches what their income is, right? The more money people make, the more they adjust their lifestyle.
Exactly.
So what advice do you have for those people?
Be aware of that. Because that's what happens, right? Is you don't see college coming. So you expand your lifestyle to bump right up against your earnings. And then you have a 17-year-old and then all of a sudden, surprise. And it shouldn't be a surprise, but that's the reality, right? Surprise, college is here and it's going to be expensive. It's like, oh, we didn't factor that in. So, some very diligent families to offset that, right? They start a savings plan when the kids are young and they save up a pile of money. Now, and again, a lot of people do have $25,000 or $50,000 saved for college, but they're looking at the state system and saying, but I'm going to need 75 or 100. It's like, yeah, but usually we can get over that hump. But
Okay.
then some people that are also saying, but not only that, but my kid doesn't want to go to the state school. They want to go to this private school over here that starts at 75, and we've already figured out he'll get a great scholarship. So instead of being 75, it's going to be 40, but 40 is still more than the state school at 25.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have a decision to make. Should we stretch and spend it or not? And again, anecdotal evidence, again, I've talked with lots of families about this, and in a lot of cases, it's, well, based on what's going on, you need 1,000 a month or 2,000 a month towards retirement to get you where your retirement goals are. And then based on your college goals, at the low cost schools, it's 500 a month. But if you want to go to the stretch to the higher cost schools, it's 1,500 a month. And some families will look at me and say, well, if that's all it takes, we're in, right? We've got lots of free cash flow. Other families are like, we'd have to change a lot and to do that. So we're not willing to stretch. We're going to have to limit it to the state schools. And that's a function of, again, how much discipline the families had over the years, and where their debt is and where their income is. And a lot of times life has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where sudden illnesses, some sudden job loss, failing businesses, lots of divorce, lots of things happen that derail plans, and then we're kind of picking up the pieces. So some people do a great job and it works out well. Some people tried to do a great job, but they were blindsided. Some people just didn't even realize college was coming, didn't think it through and say, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to have to pay for college in the next 7 years, maybe we shouldn't buy that bigger house. I mean, we really want it, but if we do that, we won't be able to afford college. Now that we understand that, now should we buy the bigger house? And again, some people will say, well, college isn't our priority. We'll spend more. But that's the reality, right? Is most families spend what they make on something, and they have to decide, is that something more or less important than all the other opportunities that they could spend that same money on?
Yeah. It's something that is really difficult without third party consultation to make those decisions, right? Because you see it every day. There's people who make $500,000 a year that are broke. There's people that make $75,000 a year that have a lot of savings, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen both of them, so it's really a habit of discipline, and a lot of times it's tough to do that yourself. But having a third party consult like you come in, I can see the benefits of being able to advise somebody and having a over the shoulder look and a holistic view of everything that's going on and be like, all right, let's see where we can change. This has
Right.
been fantastic. Brad, if people in the audience want to learn more about you, learn more about tips and tricks and strategies on how they can save for college, where should they go?
Right. So everything we do is at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So we've got a podcast there where people can listen. And certainly you can get the podcast wherever you get your podcast as well. On top of that, we've got free resources like the scholarship guide for busy parents. Plays right into, it's not going to teach you everything you need to know about scholarships. It's going to teach you enough to decide which scholarships do I need to go work on versus, so it's very quick. It's just 4 videos. They're each like 10 or 12 minutes. And again, it's not covering everything, but that gets you started, and then you can decide how much effort you want to put into that. We've got costs of college. We've got the calculators. We've got all kinds of resources, a free newsletter. And then if you want to reach out to me directly, we've got phone numbers and schedule appointments right on the website as well.
All right. We'll make sure that is posted in the show notes. Brad, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Hopefully you got some great advice from this and have some tidbits. I guarantee you, head on over to the Brad's website. You're going to discover some gold nuggets. Brad, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi. Yep. Thanks for having me.